Hey YouTube, this is Old School from WhatTheBuck.net coming to you live from Valrico, Florida with a little preview for the Browns game this week. Now both teams coming into this week are probably marking a W down in their schedule. I know when we were doing the preseason predictions, even the worst Bucs attackers, I guess for lack of a better word since my SAT vocabulary is out the window today, were giving us a shot against Cleveland. This is a team that's in a rebuilding mode as well. They're putting together a lot of new pieces over there. And the Browns fans are probably the optimists amongst them, are in the same state that we are as Bucs fans, thinking, hey, this is a chance for a brighter day than last year. We've got to be going nowhere but up. And maybe this game against the Bucs, even though it's an away game to open the season for them, is a chance to go in and steal a victory. It's amazing to me how many Bucs proponents are saying pretty much the same thing. When I look at this game, it's a clash of two different styles. The Cleveland Browns are very much in the style of the dirty AFC, right? They're going to try and beat the hell out of you. Even though they got a speedster like Cribbs out there, they're going to try and run behind their monsters up front, Steinbach and Thomas and guys. They're going to try and mash you up. And in talking to the guys from Moohead Radio, which is a Cleveland group we did a show with this week, that's really what they want to do. They want to try and beat you up in the line, control the time of possession, and let Jake manage the game. Now, Cleveland fans are very excited about Jake Delhomme coming over to them. They consider him a huge step up from Anderson and Quinn, which in my opinion says volumes about where they were at with Anderson and Quinn, because I'm not a huge Jake Delhomme fan. I don't care if he's 9-2 against the Bucs. I don't like Jake Delhomme as a quarterback. I think he is starting to fall apart. He's going to continue to fall apart. And I think as one of the keys to the game is the Bucs are going to have to make him beat us, even though he's done it in the past. And everyone heard the quotes about Raheem hopping on the press call and making the comments to Jake, which I thought were very funny as well. But you look at Harrison, who they're going to have to deal with because Hardesty's injury. Word out of Cleveland is that he's been putting the ball on the ground a fair amount. He's a fast back. He's a guy that if he gets that second level, he can make you pay. He can take it all the way to the house. And he did, the last 3 games of last year, I think he was over 160 yards a game. He had the big blowout game of 286 yards against Kansas City. This is something our defense has got to be particularly cautious about because our fundamentals have not been good. Even though guys like Quincy and Gino have been able to get in there and disrupt plays, they haven't been finishing the plays. This is what we've been harping on the entire offseason and through training camp is fundamentals. When you get your hands on these guys, you've got to hold them up so the rest of the defense can rally around you. When you look at the tapes of Josh Cribbs' returns, it's the same thing. And Coach Bisaccia, our return game has been absolutely horrible on the defense side. We have got to make sure we're maintaining our lane responsibility, and when we get a guy who's got a hand near him, hold him up, get the guys to rally around him, and get the guy on the ground. That is going to be absolutely critical. Now, they've got another guy, Peyton Hillis, who they actually call their Mike Allstott. And one of the fears I think Bucs fans have is that with their offensive line, they're going to pound the hell out of our guys up front, and they're going to control the time of possession and run it down our throat. If we start seeing that, then it's going to be a long day for Bucs fans, and it's going to be a harbinger of a long season for Bucs fans. This defense, and I said this in a previous video, has got to have more to show than they showed in preseason. And I don't know whether it's the pewter-colored glasses or what it is, but I have to believe that Coach Morris has more than he's shown. His blitz attempts have been interesting, but not complete, and they have been schematically broken sometimes, which is atypical for what he's done. And I don't know that he's necessarily so coy as to try and put some of that stuff in there or to intentionally have them run in a different mode, but I've got to believe that our defense is going to look better than it looked in preseason, given the talent we have on the field and given the way that I've seen Coach Morris call defense in the past. Now that brings us over to the offensive side of the ball with Josh Freeman. The comments from the Browns fans were, well, how can you pick on our quarterback? Look at who you've got. Josh Freeman, not only does he have a busted-up thumb, but this is a young guy who didn't do much last year. And it spoke volumes to their lack of understanding about what Josh did. And whether I liked the draft pick or not, I've been won over by Josh Freeman. Practice notes, he looks good. He's going full speed, full bore, which is good for us. And more importantly, in my mind, is when you look at the stats last year of Jake Delhomme versus Josh Freeman. Now, stats don't mean a whole lot sometimes, and when I was trying to do an analysis for this game, if you go back to last year's stats, neither team's stats from last year really matter because they've really redone a lot of what they're going to be doing this year. The Bucs have redone their entire offensive playbook, more or less, with Greg Olsen having the whole offseason. They've got a lot more talent, a lot of young guys on that side of the ball, and the Browns have done a very similar thing with a new signal caller and a whole new scheme as well. So looking at last year's stats for a comparison perspective isn't very useful. We can't even look at preseason stats because they're not using the full scheme. So you have to go through player by player. So I want to go back and look at Jake Delhomme, what he did with Carolina versus what Josh Freeman did. Now, Jake had a couple more starts. They ended up with a percentage that was 1 point off, a 6.4 to 6.3 yards or average yards per catch or per completion. Jake obviously had the interception issue, right? Well, Josh had 18 interceptions too. Right, so we can't really claim that we don't have a guy that throws picks. But Josh had 2 more touchdowns. Now, this is a rookie who got no time in preseason, no real number 1 snaps at all. right? And he throws for more touchdowns, the same number of interceptions, is sacked 3 less times behind a shoddy offensive line last year by and large, right? And ran for 100 more yards. And though we beat him up for the fumbles, he had 1 less fumble than Jake Delhomme. So I know that Jake has done good things in the past, right? I'm not saying he hasn't. But as far as looking at him as an upgrade, I don't see it. And when you look at the keys to the game, I think you've got to look at Jake Delhomme. He's going to be the thing we've got to do. We've got to make that team one-dimensional. We can't let Harrison gouge us up. We've got to make sure on the reversals, and we've talked about this as well, and Steve White, we were going back and forth on Twitter about it, our ends have got to be gap sound and end sound, right? They've got to make sure they keep contained, don't allow those misdirections and redirections to really come back and bite us. Our team is so quick on the defensive side of the ball that they have a tendency to over-pursue, and that's a vestige of youth and inexperience. They have got to make sure from a defensive standpoint that they are staying sound, staying home, and not allowing those Cleveland Browns to do those sorts of misdirections. Now, I did watch Pat Kerwin's video. I found it very interesting how high he seemed to be, at least comparatively, on the Browns. And the quote that I remember him saying was that Delhomme sets them up in the right play. That's a damn shame that they didn't have any NFL quarterbacks to get them in the right play last year. So, running game, like I said, we've got to establish a running game on our side too. Our offensive line, and we were talking about this with Jeff Fain on Facebook this week, the offensive line has got to find an identity. There's a lot of talent in that offensive line. We got Kedrick Vincent in there as a road grader. We've got to get Caddy some lanes to run. And with change of pace with Kareem Huggins, we've got to take some of the pressure off Josh and off of Mike Williams and Sammy Strouder and whoever the hell else we put out there at the wide receiver spots. We've got to make that Cleveland defense respect us. Additionally, given the weather and given the fact that I know we'll have them in their crap brown jerseys, we've got to make them fat boys sweat. Right? I was out there in a black jersey when my friend played on the Saints for 10 minutes, and I don't know how these guys do it. Right? So keep them out on the field. We can't have this crappy time of possession we've had through all preseason. We've got to maintain possession of the ball and get these guys beat down. As it is, the Cleveland fans say their linebacking core is slow. That's going to bode well for Winslow, even though they probably will do what Pat says and try and take Kellen out of the game. I'm telling you, if they do that, Mike Williams and or Sammy Strouder is going to make them pay, and I still think Aurelius Ben is going to pop. I don't know if it's going to be in the first game, but he is going to pop because if Josh will just have some confidence in him and get the ball over to him, he's going to make the catch. Now, the other comment out of the Cleveland Browns fans were that their secondary is fairly inexperienced with the exception of Sheldon Brown. And in the video on the NFL.com, they talk about Sheldon a lot. They don't talk about Joe Hayden or any of the other guys. But that's really one of the concerns coming out of Cleveland. I really want to see that as an afterthought. I know Greg Olson's West Coast style is going to want him to throw the ball, but I'm happy enough to see some of the bubble screens and the drags at the beginning until we get things rocking a little bit on the offensive side with the running game. And then we've got to obviously make Jake beat us now. With Harrison's propensity to drop the ball on the ground, which we hope will continue, the idea of Bucs defense getting to the guy first, holding him up so the other guys can hit him, even with Aqib Talib out and E.J. Bigger stepping in for him, I do think turnovers are going to spell the difference here, and I do think the Bucs are going to take a victory this week. I think we're going to start out on the right foot. I don't think it's going to do anything to get people in the stands because, again, this is one of those things where you can't win. If we beat Cleveland, we should have beat them. They're a crappy team. If we don't beat Cleveland, oh, yeah, there we go, not winning again. But I look for improvement. I look for some cohesion. I don't know if that's really a word, but we'll go with it. Cohesiveness, maybe. On the offensive and defensive side of the ball, I look to see Brian Price and Gerald McCoy make some noise and Roy Miller hold it down, and we're hoping that we see Styles White because he's been an absentee defensive end. So I know that our boy Steve White wants to see Mike Bennett get in there too, so we'll see what Kyle Moore can do over there, whether he keeps him off the field or whether we go with Bennett. So that's the video for this week. Hopefully you guys liked it. Rate it up. Let me know what you think.